Hello, my YouTube family and dear night owls. Welcome back to Crime Whispers. I'm here with you tonight to guide you through another haunting story, one that may help you drift into sleep, though perhaps with a chill down your spine. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And tell me, where are you tuning in from? What time is it where you are? Let's get comfortable now. Settle into your blankets, close your eyes, and listen closely. Case 1. The body by the canal. Was a cold January morning in London. The streets lay quiet beneath a thick, chilling mist. The air was sharp, the kind of cold that cuts through to the bone. As the sun barely peeked over the skyline, an elderly man strolled slowly along the narrow canal near the base of the Tower of London. He tugged his coat tighter, shielding himself from the icy breeze. Then, suddenly, his steps halted. The air, once silent, was broken by the barking of several stray dogs. 3, maybe 4 of them, clustered in a corner near the canal, barking, growling, and sniffing frantically at something. Curious and concerned, the man moved closer. A strange foul odor hit his nose. With hesitant steps, he approached the What he saw froze him in place. Lying still in the grass was the body of a young girl. She had been savagely attacked. Her face was mutilated beyond recognition, her body slashed with countless wounds, and her chest torn open. The man recoiled in horror, his knees weak. He turned and stumbled, running to the nearest police box. The image of what he had just witnessed burned into his mind. By the time police arrived, a crowd had already gathered. But no one could prepare for what the investigators were about to see. The girl lay half naked on the frozen earth. She had been sexually assaulted. Her skull was crushed, her golden hair drenched in blood. The most chilling detail of all, her chest cavity was emptied, her heart and other organs were missing. Yet, eerily, there was almost no blood at the scene. The ground was strangely clean. Detectives quickly theorized that she must have been killed elsewhere, and her body moved, here possibly after being drained of blood. The idea alone made the officers shiver. Who could carry out something so grotesque? As they combed the area for evidence, a man emerged from the crowd, pale and trembling. When he saw the girl's body, he collapsed in grief, sobbing uncontrollably. Oh. Pamela. The man was Edward Theodore Chalmer Werner, well-known resident of the city's prestigious legation quarter. He had just identified the body as his adopted daughter, Pamela Werner. Through tears, Edward explained that Pamela had gone missing the night before. They had searched everywhere, but no one could have imagined this unspeakable end. The news of the murder sent shockwaves across London. The cruelty of the crime left the public horrified. Pamela was only 17, a bright, confident girl raised in privilege. Her father, Edward Werner, was once a British consul in Beijing. He and his wife Gladys had adopted Pamela from a Chinese orphanage after learning they could not conceive. Edward adored her. She was his world. But when Pamela was just 5 years old, Gladys died of illness, and Edward was left to raise his daughter alone. Despite the tragedy, Pamela flourished. She was raised among London's upper class, surrounded by wealth and prestige. She grew into a radiant young woman, admired not just for her beauty, but for her fierce intellect and independent spirit. On the night of her disappearance, Pamela had been ice skating with 2 of her closest friends. Laughter echoed across the rink as they enjoyed the crisp winter air. But as the evening darkened and the cold deepened, the girls said their goodbyes. Her friends hesitated, worried about her cycling home alone in the dark. But Pamela just smiled. "London is the safest city in the world," she said. With confidence, she slung her skates over her shoulder, hopped on her bicycle, and disappeared into the night. Back at home, Edward sat in his armchair by the fireplace, as he always did in the evenings, waiting for Pamela's return. But as the clock ticked past the hour, anxiety began to creep in. Something wasn't right. He sent a servant to check the ice rink, but Pamela was nowhere to be found. No one had seen her since she left. Fear gripped Edward's heart. He set out, himself, flashlight in hand, scouring the streets, alleys, and corners of the city. The cold wind whipped his face, but he kept going. Pamela had to be somewhere then. The next morning, the news broke. A body had been found by the canal. Edward rushed to the scene, and there, beneath a tarp, he saw her golden hair. Pamela. The autopsy was grim. She had died from brain hemorrhaging after repeated blows to the head with a blunt object. Her arms were broken, post-mortem, and a sharp blade, possibly a surgical sword, had been used to remove her internal organs with alarming precision. Investigators feared the killer may have had surgical knowledge, perhaps a doctor, or someone even more sinister. At first, all suspicion fell on Edward himself. He had discovered the body. He had been emotionally distressed. He had no alibi. But was it grief or guilt? Case 1, The Body by the Canal, Part 2. Whispers began to swirl in the shadows. Many started to believe the unimaginable, that Edward Werner himself had murdered his daughter. Neighbors and acquaintances described Edward as a man with a quick temper and very little emotional restraint. He was brilliant, highly educated, a respected scholar, but his intelligence was often overshadowed by his explosive outbursts. There were disturbing stories, tales of Edward lashing out in fits of rage, sometimes even resorting to violence. He had once been forced to resign from a foreign diplomatic post after an incident in which he used a whip on local workers he deemed disobedient. In another episode, he reportedly broke a man's nose for harassing Pamela in public. To the public, Edward was a man ruled by passion, pride, and rage. Could he have lost control and killed the daughter he claimed to love so dearly? The police couldn't ignore the possibility. His past painted him as volatile, and he became their prime suspect early in the investigation. But then came the moment that changed everything. When Edward arrived at the scene and saw Pamela's lifeless body, his grief was visceral. He collapsed in front of her, sobbing uncontrollably. Witnesses later recalled that the pain on his face couldn't be faked. He was a broken man, and after thoroughly searching his home, his clothing, and every inch of his belongings, the police found no evidence, no blood, no signs of a struggle, nothing that tied Edward to the crime. Still, the investigation struggled. Several individuals were arrested as persons of interest, but without solid proof. They were all released. No charges were filed. No answers came, and slowly, the case began to die. Pamela's murder faded from headlines. Public interest dimmed. London moved on. Everyone, that is, except Edward, haunted daily by the horror of his daughter's death. He could not rest. While the police seemed indifferent and sluggish, Edward pressed forward, determined to uncover the truth on his own. He believed one thing deeply: whoever killed Pamela had to be someone wealthy. Her diamond watch, a valuable item, had not been stolen. That meant robbery wasn't the motive. This was personal and disturbing. Though his pleas to reopen the case were repeatedly denied by British authorities, Edward refused to give up. He posted a substantial reward for any information that could lead to the killer. Tips began to pour in, most useless. But among the noise, one voice stood out. Her name was Marie. She was a sex worker who worked in the Badlands, a notorious district, known for vice and secrecy. With a quiet, haunted gaze, Marie told Edward something he couldn't ignore. On the night of Pamela's murder, Marie claimed to have seen a young blonde girl Pamela enter the district with 3 men. One of them she knew well. His name, Prentice, a wealthy, well-connected dentist with a reputation for wild, depraved behavior when his wife was away. Marie remembered Prentice vividly. She had once worked one of his infamous parties, nude serving drinks while he paraded around, showing off his prized possession, a collection of hunting knives displayed like trophies on his walls. Sharp, polished blades that always gave her a strange, unsettling feeling. She never forgot them. That night, Marie said, Pamela was taken into a restricted room on the first floor of Prentice's private space. Then she heard the screams, 2 shrill, piercing cries full of pain and terror. Then, silence, and a heavy thud. Marie trembled as she spoke. She was certain Pamela had been killed that night right there in that room, by Prentice and the 2 men who came with him. And Marie wasn't the only one. Another woman, working nearby, confirmed the story independently. The same girl, the same men, the same screams. Edward's resolve only deepened, driven by their testimonies. He followed every possible lead, determined to piece together the truth. Eventually, he found someone the police had already spoken to, a rickshaw puller who'd been working near the Badlands that night. This time, however, the man spoke freely, with a fearful look in his eyes. The rickshaw puller revealed that he had, indeed, seen Pamela that night live, and accompanied by 3 foreign men. One of them he later recognized as Prentice, from a photograph Edward showed him. But that wasn't all. Several hours after he first saw them, the group returned. This time, Pamela was different. She was limp, her clothes torn, her face hidden beneath a thick cloth. She didn't move. The men ordered the rickshaw driver to take them to a secluded area far from the city. Terrified but obedient, he complied. As he drove, fear gnawed at him. He couldn't stop glancing at the girl. Something was horribly wrong. When they reached a remote patch of land, the men disembarked and paid him. But just as he turned to leave, one of them pulled out a knife, its blade pressed against his throat. "If you tell anyone," the man warned, "you die." Shaking, the rickshaw puller fled and never spoke a word, till now. This was the final piece Edward needed. All signs pointed to Prentice. The descriptions matched. The timing fit. The location aligned with where Pamela's body had been found, but no arrests were ever made. Pamela's murder was never solved, and Edward Werner, heartbroken, angry, and abandoned by a system that failed him, never stopped seeking justice for the daughter he raised and loved. Case 1. Conclusion: Pamela Werner's. Edward dug deeper. The truth grew darker. There was damning evidence linking Prentice and his inner circle to a series of depraved sex parties events, where vulnerable girls were lured under false pretenses, coerced into disturbing acts, and then forced into silence. Through threats or shame, Edward uncovered another crucial detail. On the night Pamela was killed, no film had been playing at the cinema, despite Prentice's alibi claiming he had gone to see one. It was yet another lie, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Determined, Edward once again pleaded for the case to be reopened, but once again, the court turned its back on him, piecing everything together. Edward believed he now saw the full picture. Prentice had fixated on Pamela ever since he treated her dental issues, gaining her trust. He later invited her to a party, one she had no reason to fear. He was a respected dentist, after all. She accepted, unaware of the danger she was walking into. After the initial gathering, they took her to a brothel. There, she was overpowered by 3 men. Though Pamela was strong-willed and intelligent, she was no match for what followed. Her arms and legs were restrained. A heavy blow struck her head. Within minutes, she lay motionless on the filthy floor. Dead panic swept through the room. Her killers, realizing the gravity of what they had done, sought to destroy the evidence, ensuring the body could not be identified, and their names would never be spoken. Despite Edward Werner's exhaustive efforts, the truth never saw justice. Over 150 pages of notes, witness accounts, and damning evidence were ignored, suppressed, buried. Whether due to bribery or indifference, the authorities simply didn't care. Pamela's case did not fade into obscurity because of a lack of answers. It faded because of unseen hands pulling strings. Because the system failed her and Edward. He was left with grief, frustration, and a gnawing question that would haunt him until his final days. Why didn't anyone care enough to find her killer? Case 2. Pastor Elijah King. Now, let me take you to Florida, where on the surface faith, family, and fellowship painted the perfect portrait of a community leader. Pastor Elijah King, 42, was a pillar of his church. His sermons were powerful, filled with fire and scripture, drawing hundreds who saw him as a beacon of righteousness. He spoke often of integrity, marriage, and moral clarity, and lived in the spotlight as the embodiment of all he preached. His wife, Naomi King, 38, was poised and gracious. She was the silent strength behind Elijah's ministry, raising their 5 children with care and grace. Their children Abigail, Elijah Jr., Noah, Sophie, and Michael were seen as ideal, polite, well-mannered, and deeply involved in church life. Their home radiated warmth. Sunday school, charity drives, Bible studies. Naomi was at the heart of it all. And then there was Deacon Henry King, Elijah's father, at 65. Henry was the church elder, deeply respected, and often described as the moral compass of the entire congregation. For decades, he served faithfully, mentoring his son, shaping him into the leader he became. Elijah would often praise him from the pulpit, calling him the rock on which their family and church stood. To the community, they were the ideal Christian family. Each Sunday dinner, the King household gathered at Henry's home. Scripture, readings, prayers, stories, and laughter. It was a ritual they all cherished, and it was during one of these dinners that something unusual happened. Abigail, the oldest at 16, spoke up, her voice full of curiosity and excitement. "For my genealogy project at school," she said, "I thought we could all take a DNA test. It'd be fun learn more about our ancestry, maybe even find some distant relatives." The younger kids lit up with excitement, speculating about hidden royal bloodlines or long-lost cousins. Elijah smiled warmly. "That sounds like a great idea," he said. "We'll all do it together." But Naomi's reaction was different. She hesitated, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for her glass. "I don't know, Abby," she said quietly. "These things aren't always accurate, and they can bring up things best left alone." Her eyes drifted to Henry, who sat stone-faced at the head of the table. Elijah laughed softly, brushing off her concern. "Come on, Naomi. What's the harm? It's for school. We've got nothing to hide." Naomi held his gaze for a moment. Something passed between them unspoken, tense. Then she nodded. "All right," she whispered. A week later, the DNA kits arrived. The children were giddy. Elijah handled the process himself, helping them complete the tests and mail them off. Weeks passed. Then the results came in. They gathered around the family computer, Elijah leading the way. Abigail clicked through their family tree, marveling at the ancestral links and historical data. But then Elijah frowned. His name, his connection to the children. Something wasn't right. "This says," he began, staring at the screen. "It says I'm not biologically related to any of them." He let out a nervous laugh, waving it off. "Must be an error probably. Some kind of glitch in the system." Naomi didn't speak. Her hand gripped the edge of her chair. Henry's face remained expressionless, but his jaw tightened ever so slightly. "I'll reach out to the company," Elijah said. "They'll clear it up." But when the company responded days later, there was no confusion. "We've triple-checked the samples," the representative told Elijah over the phone. "There is no mistake. The children are not biologically yours." Elijah King's heart sank. The voice on the other end of the line was steady, but final. "The biological father is not you. The markers match someone else, a close relative from your submitted samples." Elijah froze. His world collapsed in an instant. He asked them to repeat it, hoping he'd misheard. But the answer didn't change. It could only be one person. His father-Henry. Elijah hung up. Numb. His mind began to race. Henry's constant presence, Naomi's unease whenever he visited, her hesitation about the DNA test. The pieces of a puzzle he never wanted to solve were now violently falling into place. That evening, Elijah returned home, a stack of printed results gripped tightly in his hand. Naomi was in the living room folding laundry when he threw the papers onto the table. His voice was cold, trembling with barely contained fury. "Explain this." Naomi's eyes shifted from the papers to his face. "What are you talking about?" she asked, voice already cracking. "The DNA results," he snapped. "They're saying I'm not the father, but they also say it's someone else from my family. Want to explain that?" Naomi's face drained of color. She staggered back, gripping a chair for support. There must be a mistake," she whispered. "I had them double-check it," Elijah said, stepping closer. "There's no mistake. Tell me the truth, Naomi." Naomi collapsed into the chair, her body shaking as tears began to fall. And then, the dam broke. Through sobs, she confessed. Early in their marriage, Henry had coerced her into a sexual relationship. He manipulated her, used his authority and influence, and made her feel powerless. The abuse went on for years. All 5 of them, Naomi choked out. "The kids, they're all his. I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't want to destroy you." Elijah staggered backward, as if the truth had physically struck him. His wife, his children, his father, his entire life was a lie. Without a word, he stormed out of the house, into the night. Alone in his car, Elijah sat under the moonlight, trembling. His world had crumbled in hours. His children, his pride, his joy, they weren't. His wife, the woman he had shared his soul with, had been living with this secret. And Henry, the man who baptized him, raised him, taught him scripture, was a predator. The pain was overwhelming. He screamed into the darkness, punched the dashboard until his fists throbbed. WHY? He drove 4 hours, memories crashing. Through him, birthday parties, church sermons, family dinners, all tainted by dawn. He found himself at the edge of a lake. The surface of the water was still, but inside him, a storm raged. Compassion gave way to something else, vengeance. There was no forgiveness now, only justice. And justice, in his mind, meant blood. When Elijah returned home, he was eerily calm. Naomi, pale and broken, had spent the night sobbing in their bedroom. She looked up when he entered the living room, her eyes searching his face for anything that resembled the man she once loved. He said nothing. A kitchen knife rested in his grip. "Elijah, please," Naomi whispered. "I know you're hurt, but we don't." His voice was flat, hollow. "Don't try to fix this with words. You've destroyed everything." Naomi stood, trembling. "I was trapped. I didn't know what to do." Elijah laughed, sharp. "You didn't want to hurt me," he sneered. "You let him violate our marriage. You watched him sit at our table. You let me believe those kids were mine." Naomi dropped to her knees, sobbing. "I'm sorry. I love you. You should have told me." And then he snapped. With a flash of steel and a burst of rage, Elijah drove the knife into her chest. Naomi gasped, eyes wide with disbelief. Again and again. The room filled with the sound of tearing flesh and anguished cries. "You should have stopped him," Elijah screamed, each stab fueled by betrayal. When it was over, Naomi lay motionless in a pool of blood. But Elijah's fury wasn't satisfied. One more person had to pay. The evening air was thick as Elijah drove to Henry's house, knuckles white around the steering wheel. The streets were quiet. His mind a roar of vengeance. He kicked in the door. Henry was sitting at the table with a Bible open and a cup of tea in hand. He looked up, startled. "Elijah, what are you doing here?" Without a word, Elijah slammed the DNA results onto the table. "Explain this." Henry scanned the paper. His face tightened. "I don't know what this is. Don't lie to me," Elijah roared. "You raped my wife. You fathered my children. You sat in my house like a saint while destroying my life." Henry stood up, hands raised. "Son, please." But Elijah was beyond reason. There would be no prayers, no mercy. Number, forgiveness, only justice. Haven't you fathered my children? Elijah's voice trembled with fury. Henry stood, raising his hands in a futile gesture of calm. Elijah, listen to me, it's not what you think. Don't lie to me. Elijah roared, his voice booming through the room like thunder. You destroyed my family. You're a monster. Before Henry could utter another word, Elijah lunged forward, driving a knife into his father's side. Henry cried out, stumbling backward, clutching at the wound as blood soaked through his shirt. But Elijah didn't stop. With savage precision, he stabbed him again and again, each thrust fueled by years of betrayal and rage. Henry collapsed to the floor, writhing in agony, his strength fading fast. You deserve to feel the pain you inflicted on me, Elijah growled, standing over him. Henry tried to crawl away, gasping, but his body refused to obey. Elijah knelt beside him, his voice now chillingly calm. This is for Naomi. This is for the lies. This is for my children. Gripping the knife tightly, Elijah began the gruesome act of mutilation, cutting off Henry's manhood. Henry's screams filled the room, his body convulsing in unbearable pain. But Elijah's expression remained stone cold, his focus unwavering, as he carried out his grotesque retribution. The agony proved too much. Henry's screams faded, his body trembling violently until finally going still. One final, ragged breath escaped his lips and then silence. Elijah dropped the blood-soaked knife and stumbled back, his chest heaving. The room reeked of iron and death. For a moment, he stood over the lifeless body of the man he once called father. But there was no relief, no peace, only a hollow emptiness where love and family used to be. He walked out of the house, clothes soaked in blood, and sat on the front porch. The quiet neighborhood erupted into chaos when police arrived, responding. 2 frantic 911 calls about terrifying screams and crashing sounds. Weapons drawn, officers approached cautiously, expecting a standoff. Instead, they found Elijah sitting calmly on the porch, a Bible resting on his lap. He looked up at them with a blank expression and said, "It's done. God's justice has been served." The officers quickly handcuffed him, unease rippling through the ranks. Inside the house, they found a scene beyond comprehension. Henry's body was butchered, chest riddled with stab wounds, and his genitals cruelly severed. Blood pooled around him, and signs of violent struggle covered the room. As Elijah sat in the back of the patrol car, he turned to one of the officers and said casually, "Naomi, you'll find her at our house. She betrayed me too." Officers raced to Elijah's home, and what they found was even worse. Naomi's dismembered body lay in the living room. Her remains were arranged in a methodical, chilling display of rage. Back at the station, Elijah gave a full, emotionless confession. "She lied to me for years," he said of Naomi, "and my father. He ruined everything I believed in. They had to pay." His recounting was cold, detailed, and devoid of remorse. "They destroyed our family," he concluded. "I just finished what they started." The dual crime scenes, the gruesome brutality, Elijah's unnerving commit, all shocked the community. Once a respected preacher, Elijah King had become a symbol of terror. His trial drew national attention, a horrifying tale of betrayal, vengeance, and bloodshed. The courtroom overflowed with journalists, curious onlookers, and former congregation members desperate to see how justice would be served. The defense argued Elijah had been pushed past human limits by unspeakable betrayal. Psychologists testified to his mental collapse upon discovering his father's abuse of Naomi and the truth about his children's paternity. But the prosecution focused on the brutality and premeditation, especially the mutilation. They argued that no matter how deep the betrayal, nothing could justify such violence. After days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict: guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. The judge, acknowledging the emotional weight of the case, but bound by the law, sentenced Elijah to life in prison without parole. His children, now orphaned, were separated and placed into foster care, left to grapple with the horrific legacy of their family's collapse. The once admired King family became a haunting cautionary tale, proof that secrets, betrayal, and silence can destroy even the most devout. As Elijah was led out of the courtroom in chains, he clutched his Bible tightly, muttering prayers to the God he believed had guided his hand. To the public, he became a symbol of the destructive power of hidden truths, a tragic figure consumed by rage in his quest for justice. Elijah King's descent from revered preacher to remorseless killer stands as a chilling testament to what horrors may be unleashed when betrayal and secrets go unchecked. Felix grew up in a rather modest, large family and developed a love for sports early in life. As a child, he dreamed of becoming a professional baseball player, but fate had other plans set in motion by a rather unusual incident. When Felix was just 9 years old, a family friend visited with his son, who was the same age. The 2 boys began playing in the yard, but their play quickly turned into a fight. The parents intervened, and the visiting father jokingly remarked that if Felix wanted to fight, he should do it properly, with boxing gloves. That offhand comment stuck. Shortly afterward, Felix begged to be taken to a local gym, and from his very first training session, he fell in love with boxing. By 16, Felix had already made a name for himself, winning the Pan American Junior Championships. A year later, he became his country's national champion, and shortly after that, he competed in the London Olympics, making it to the quarterfinals. That same year, he launched his professional boxing career. Over time, Felix fought in 29 matches, winning 27 of them with impressive ease. In 2014, he delivered what would be recognized as the best knockout of the year during a match against Sergio Vio. The following year, he claimed his first championship belt, the WBO Latino title, which he successfully defended 6 times over the next 2 years. Anyone who saw him in the ring was convinced this young man was destined to leave his mark on boxing history. Now, let's get to know Keisha Rodriguez. Born in November 1993 in San Juan, Puerto Rico, Keisha's full name was Keisha Marlene Rodriguez Ortiz. Her parents, Jose and Kayla Rodriguez, had another daughter together, Bareilles Nicole, and also raised Kayla's son, Jonathan, from a previous marriage. Keisha was a bright, outgoing, and affectionate young girl who loved animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. Her closest confidant was her sister Bareilles, with whom she shared everything. Keisha and Felix attended the same school and had known each other since childhood. As teenagers, their friendship blossomed into a romantic relationship. In 2011, Keisha's parents divorced. Her mother, Kayla, moved to Florida. But by then, Keisha and her sister were adults and chose to remain in San Juan, though they had started living independent lives. The sisters remained close and regularly kept each other updated. At age 18, the already promising boxer Felix began a relationship with a younger schoolgirl, 14-year-old, aspiring model Elisa Maria Santiago Sierra. Despite Elisa's young age, her parents did not object to the relationship. Felix, charming and rising fast in the world of boxing, had always been surrounded by female attention and didn't hesitate to engage in multiple flings, even while seriously involved with Elisa. At the same time, he continued seeing his old flame, Keisha. Both Keisha's sister Bareilles and her mother Kayla knew about the situation and strongly disapproved. The love triangle became increasingly complicated. On one side was Elisa, who believed she was Felix's only love and future wife. On the other side was Keisha, aware that Felix had a fiancée, but unable to break free from a relationship rooted in years of history and deep emotions. In 2016, Felix married Elisa, who was then just 19 years old. By that time, She had built a successful modeling career, amassed tens of thousands of social media followers, and even opened her own beauty studio specializing in eyelash extensions. But only months after their wedding, Felix was involved in a serious motorcycle accident. He was hospitalized with head trauma, severe bruises, and lacerations. His coach, Ricky Marquez, feared that this accident would end the promising athlete's career. However, Felix made a swift and surprising recovery and soon returned to the ring. In December 2019, Felix posted a photo with his visibly pregnant wife on social media, captioned, "Soon I'll meet my daddy's princess." A month later, he announced the birth of their daughter, Miranda Bero Santiago, to the public. Felix appeared to be a loving husband and devoted father. But behind closed doors, he was still secretly seeing Keisha. Elisa suspected infidelity, but each time confronted him, Felix would tearfully promise to end the affair. Keisha, for her part, made several attempts to leave the toxic relationship, but Felix refused to let her go. He even threatened her, warning that if she ever dated someone else, there would be consequences not just for her, but for her new partner as well. Still deeply in love with Felix since high school, Keisha remained entangled in the affair. She pursued her dream and became a veterinary assistant, working at a center for veterinary medicine and aesthetics. Colleagues described her as conscientious, hardworking, and passionate about animals. She lived with her 2 dogs and a cat, whom she adored. In 2020, Elisa found damning evidence messages between Felix and several women, including Keisha. Furious, she kicked him out of the house, threatening divorce and to cut off access to their daughter. For a while, Felix distanced himself from Keisha, trying to salvage his public image and declining career. But he never truly let her go. Eventually, their secret meetings resumed. In April 2021, Keisha took a pregnancy test and it was positive. She first shared the news with her sister, who knew all about the complex relationship. Keisha, now 27, had no intention of having an abortion. She was ready to raise the child alone if she had to. When she told Felix, however, his reaction was anything but supportive. He became enraged, demanding she see a doctor and get an abortion. He warned her that having an illegitimate child would destroy his reputation. But Keisha stood her ground, refusing to terminate the pregnancy. What followed would mark the beginning of a much darker chapter. He couldn't allow it. After visiting the hospital, Keisha's pregnancy was officially confirmed. She now had a medical certificate to prove it. When she broke the news to Felix, his reaction was explosive. Enraged, he immediately demanded that Keisha terminate the pregnancy, but she stood her ground, firmly refusing. Not willing to give up, Felix changed his approach. He claimed he didn't believe her and insisted on seeing the medical certificate himself. He arranged to meet Keisha that evening in a public area. That didn't surprise her. They often met in discreet locations to avoid attracting attention. But behind the scenes, a darker plan was already in motion. Days before that meeting, Felix paid a visit to an old friend, Luis Antonio Cotasa, man who worked at a machine shop and had deep connections to the criminal underworld, especially the local drug trade. Felix explained the situation in brief, asking Luis for help in dealing with his pregnant mistress. Luis, who had been on law enforcement's radar before, hesitated at first. The idea of prison terrified him, but Felix was persistent that everything would go smoothly, that the police would never suspect them, and most importantly, that he would pay handsomely. Eventually, Luis agreed, with the plan set. Felix called Keisha and asked her to meet him on the evening of April 29th. He told her he wanted to confirm the pregnancy himself and talk about what to do next. Right after the call, Keisha phoned her sister to share the update. She still held on to hope that maybe Felix would come around, maybe he'd accept the child. But her sister, Baris, was alarmed. She knew about Felix's previous threats and feared he might do something dangerous. Baris even contacted their mother to express her concerns. Still, neither of them could convince Keisha to cancel the meeting. That night, Keisha arrived at the designated location in her Kia Forte, carrying the medical documents. Felix showed up in his pickup truck with Luis hidden in the back. When Keisha got into Felix's vehicle and handed him the papers, he once again insisted on an abortion. When she refused, through tears, their argument quickly escalated. Suddenly, Felix struck her in the head. The blow knocked her unconscious, while Keisha lay limp. Felix retrieved a syringe from the glove compartment filled with a high dose of illegal drugs Luis had provided. He injected her. Then, together, the two men carried her unconscious body to the pickup truck's bed. There, they had already prepared pieces of wire and a concrete block. They tied Keisha up, attached a weight, and covered her with a tarp. Felix climbed back into his pickup, while Luis got behind the wheel of Keisha's car. They drove through the night to a bridge over the San Jose Laguna desolate spot, with no one around. Once they were sure the coast was clear, they threw Keisha, still alive, into the water. As a final act of brutality, they fired several rounds into the lagoon to ensure she had no chance of survival. Then, they each went their separate ways back to their homes, as if nothing had happened. The next day, concern quickly spread. Keisha didn't show up for work at the veterinary clinica, place she never missed without notice. Her coworkers called her repeatedly, but she never answered. Eventually, they reached out to her sister. After several failed attempts to reach Keisha, Baris went to her home. She let herself in with a spare key and was immediately alarmed by the sight of her sister's hungry pets, unfed for nearly 24 hours. Panic set in. She called their mother, and then the police, reporting her sister missing and informing them of Felix's threats. She even contacted Felix directly, but he insisted he had been home all evening with his family and had not met Keisha. Their mother took the first flight from Florida to San Juan desperate. She hoped Keisha had simply been taken to a clinic against her will for an abortion. But the more terrifying possibility lingered in her mind. Police began their investigation by questioning Keisha's coworkers, but none had seen or heard anything unusual. Meanwhile, social media was flooded with missing person posts, pleading for information. The story quickly gained traction once it became public that Keisha had been in a long-term relationship with a famous athlete and was carrying his child. As the media spotlight grew, reporters clamored for interviews with Keisha's grieving family. The Rodriguez family held nothing back, publicly accusing Felix of being involved. On April 30th, Keisha's car was found abandoned on the east side of the city. Her personal belongings and documents were still inside. There were no signs of a struggle, which offered a faint glimmer of hope that she might still be alive. But that hope was shattered the next day. On May 1st, a passerby walking across the bridge over the San Jose Lagoon noticed what looked like a body in the water. Authorities arrived quickly and recovered the body of a young woman, though the body had suffered significant decomposition. The family identified her almost immediately, thanks to a distinctive tattoo on her arm. It was Keisha. The news of her murder sent shockwaves across the city. Outrage erupted. Protests and spontaneous rallies broke out, with the public demanding justice. That same day, Felix was taken in for questioning, but he denied everything, repeating his alibi that he had been home all night with his family. With no hard evidence at that time, the police had no choice but to release him. The case took a sharp turn when Felix's own wife was questioned. She admitted to knowing about the affair. But what shocked investigators was her next statement. This was the first she had heard of Keisha's pregnancy, and most importantly, she could not confirm Felix's alibi. He had not been home that night. That single revelation cracked open the wall of lies and marked the beginning of justice for Keisha Rodriguez. Investigators began by reviewing traffic surveillance footage along the route leading to the bridge, where Keisha was ultimately thrown. That's when they discovered Felix's pickup truck and Keisha's car, a Kia 4 traveling closely behind. But it was clear the Kia wasn't being driven by its rightful owner. On the same day, the victim's car was seized for forensic examination. Inside, authorities found strands of hair matching Keisha's. Luis was the first of the suspects to surrender to police. He offered to fully cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. Felix, on the other hand, was taken into custody but refused to answer any questions. Despite overwhelming evidence, he denied all involvement. A firearm to Felix was also recovered. Ballistics matched it to the weapon used in the shooting that night. Cell phone records later confirmed that Felix, Luis, and Keisha were all present at the bridge during the time of the murder. Keisha's final farewell took place on May 8th. The funeral drew national attention and served as a public outcry for justice, highlighting the broader crisis of gender-based violence. Her coffin wasn't transported in a traditional hearse, but in a white carriage. Showered with white flower petals from above. Public figures across Puerto Rico, including celebrities, athletes, politicians, and activists, spoke out about the high-profile killing. Felix Vero was charged with carjacking, kidnapping, premeditated murder, and the murder of an unborn child, charges that together carried the possibility of the death penalty. However, Keisha's grieving family pleaded with the court to opt for a life sentence instead, expressing their belief that Felix should spend the rest of his life suffering in prison. Due to the global COVID-19 pandemic, court proceedings were delayed several times, but in the spring of 2021, the trial finally moved forward in virtual format. The court found that the crime had been committed by multiple individuals, with prior planning, and with particular cruelty against a pregnant woman. Much of the case was pieced together thanks to Luis's full confession. He admitted that he had acquired the drug used to sedate Keisha at Felix's request, and that he had brought the wire and concrete block used in the attempt to dispose of her body. Felix, however, continued to maintain his innocence despite the mounting evidence. His denials did little to sway the court. His own wife, who testified during the trial, filed for divorce almost immediately after his arrest and distanced herself from the case entirely, focusing instead on her business and raising their young daughter. In later interviews, Ali Santiago revealed she had received multiple death threats via anonymous phone calls and messages, some even directed toward her daughter, Miranda. There were persistent rumors that she may have been involved in orchestrating the murder, but no credible evidence ever surfaced. By the summer of 2023, the jury had reviewed all the evidence and testimony. The verdict was finally in. Felix Vero and his accomplice Luis Cotes were found guilty on all counts related to the deaths of Keisha Rodriguez and her unborn child. However, their official sentencing was still pending, with the next hearing scheduled for mid-November 2023. Both men were expected to receive life sentences with no possibility of parole. Case 4. Jerome Henry Brudos. Henry Brudos was born on January 31, 1939, in the small town of Webster, South Dakota. From the very beginning, his life was steeped in hardship. As the second son, his birth deeply disappointed his mother, who had desperately wanted a daughter. Her resentment cast a long shadow over Jerome's childhood, filled with relentless physical abuse and emotional neglect. The Brudos family moved frequently across the Pacific Northwest, never settling for long. They eventually put down roots in Salem, Oregon. By then, Jerry was a lonely, emotionally disturbed child, carrying the weight of years of cruelty. One day, while wandering through a junkyard, young Jerry stumbled upon a pair of high-heeled shoes. The shoes fascinated him. He took them home, and in the privacy of his room, slipped them on. The feeling thrilled him briefly. His mother caught him, tore the shoes away, and punished him harshly. But instead of discouraging him, the experience deepened his obsession. As he entered adolescence, Jerry's fixation evolved. he began stealing women's lingerie and high heels from neighbors and classmates. By the age of 12, his compulsion was so alarming that he was sent to therapy and even admitted to psychiatric institutions, but nothing changed. During his teenage years, his behavior turned violent. He started attacking women, choking them unconscious just to steal their shoes. At 16, he abducted a girl, assaulted her, and threatened her with a knife. The attack was interrupted by an elderly couple passing by. Brutus was arrested. Under questioning, he confessed immediately. Psychiatric evaluations revealed a deep-rooted hatred toward women, especially his mother's, stemming from years of emotional trauma. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia, though doctors believed his actions were more a sign of immaturity than dangerousness. Convinced he would grow out of it, they released him after just 9 months. As an adult, Jerry tried to lead a normal life. He enlisted in the military, but was discharged due to his disturbing behaviors. He later trained as an electronics technician. In 1961, at the age of 22, he met Darcy, a 17-year-old girl. They quickly married and had 2 children. However, Jerry was as emotionally detached and violent as his own mother had been. He showed no warmth toward his children and ruled his household with intimidation. His relationship with Darcy was marked by disturbing fantasies. He often insisted she perform household chores while wearing only high heels and demanded to photograph her in provocative poses. Though she felt uncomfortable, she complied, afraid of what might happen if she resisted. One evening, Jerry escalated further. He approached Darcy wearing women's lingerie. When she recoiled in shock, he seemed genuinely hurt, as if expecting admiration, not horror. Over time, Darcy began to notice her husband Jerry's disturbing obsession. She discovered a growing collection of photographs featuring women. Although unsettled, she chose to overlook it. Eventually, however, she refused to be intimate with him. By the mid-1960s, Jerry started experiencing intense headaches and frequent blackouts. He claimed the only way to relieve his symptoms was by going on late-night raids, breaking into homes to steal women's shoes and lingerie. These stolen items became his personal trophies, meticulously hidden in his garage. He was fiercely protective of the space, even installing an intercom system to alert him if anyone came near. After years of theft and obsession, Jerry escalated. In 1968, he decided to take his dark fantasies further. 19-year-old Linda was a door-to-door saleswoman, working tirelessly to save money for college. On January 26, 1968, her route brought her to a quiet neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. When she knocked on the Guerin residence, Jerry answered. His darkest urges were immediately triggered, though his wife and children were home eating lunch. He lured Linda inside with a fabricated story. Once she crossed the threshold, he struck her violently, rendering her unconscious, and dragged her to the garage. Not a single family member heard a sound. Inside his private lair, Jerry strangled Linda to death. He then undressed her and replaced her clothing with items from his secret collection. After slipping high heels onto her lifeless feet, he posed and photographed her, mortalizing his fantasy. But Jerry knew he couldn't keep her body hidden forever. Determined to preserve a piece of the experience, he sawed off her left foot and placed it in a freezer. He planned to use it as a mold for crafting the perfect high-heeled shoe. The rest of Linda's remains were tied to a car engine and dumped in a river. Back home, he obsessed over the severed foot, trying different heels on it and capturing them in photos. It became his most prized possession. Meanwhile, Linda's disappearance went largely unnoticed for weeks. Her family filed a missing persons report, but the publishing company she worked for had no record of the homes she had visited that day. With no way to trace her steps, police were left in the dark. Eventually, her car was located abandoned, with no signs of a struggle or any missing belongings. If she had been abducted, the perpetrator had been meticulous. With no leads, the case faded into obscurity. But for Jerry, The thrill of a perfect crime only ignited a deeper hunger. Months later, on November 26, 1968, 23-year-old Jan Whitney was driving home for Thanksgiving when her car broke down between Salem and Albany. It was the perfect opportunity. Jerry pulled over and offered a ride under the guise of helping her call for a tow truck. Once she was in his car, he struck attacking her with a leather strap before taking her back to his garage. There, he suspended her body from a pulley and kept her for days, dressing, photographing, and sexually abusing her corpse. Taking his depravity even further, he amputated one of her breasts, creating a resin mold and turning it into a grotesque paperweight. When he was finally done, he tied her body to a heavy object and dumped it in a river. A few days later, Jan's car was found abandoned near Albany, where it had broken down. Investigators theorized that she may have accepted help from a stranger, but like Linda before her, she had simply vanished without a trace. Jerry remained untouchable and his thirst only deepened. On March 27, 1969, 18-year-old Karen Sprinker parked outside a department store, completely unaware she was being watched. As she exited her car, Jerry, this time disguised in women's clothing, approached and forced her into his vehicle at gunpoint. He drove her to his garage, where he subjected her to his signature ritual. Karen was forced to model his stolen lingerie while he photographed her in degrading poses. After strangling her with a pulley, he mutilated her body, removing both breasts to make additional resin molds. Her remains were then weighed down and thrown into a river. Later that day, Karen's mother waited anxiously at a downtown restaurant, excited to reunite with her daughter, but Karen never showed. After waiting more than an hour, she called the police. Officers found Karen's car still parked at the department store, her belongings and keys untouched. Witnesses mentioned seeing a tall, unusual-looking woman in the area, but one person noted something strange. They believed the woman was actually a man in disguise. It was an odd but unconfirmed observation at the time. Less than a month later, Jerry struck again. On April 21, 1969, 24-year-old Sharon Wood left work in Portland to meet her ex-husband. As she reached her car in an underground parking garage, she felt something hard press against her back, a gun. Turning, she saw a tall, freckled man with piercing blue eyes. Jerry had found his next target, but Sharon wasn't going quietly. She fought back, managing to bite his hand, and even tried to wrestle the gun from him. In a rage, he slammed her head into the concrete, momentarily stunning her. But before he could complete his attack, he heard footsteps and fled. A witness quickly contacted police, and Sharon provided a detailed description of her attacker. But despite her bravery and clarity, no suspect could be found. The very next day, Jerry attempted to abduct 15-year-old Gloria Smith in Salem. She, too, managed to escape and report the incident. Like Sharon, she described a large freckled man driving a sporty car. Police noticed the growing pattern, but still lacked the evidence to identify him. Then, on April 23rd, 22-year-old Linda Selle went shopping to buy her boyfriend a gift. While walking through a mall parking lot, Jerry approached her, flashing a fake police badge. Accusing her of shoplifting, he threatened to arrest her unless she complied. Terrified, Linda followed his instructions. Jerry brought her to his garage, restrained her hand, then left her tied up as he went about his day. Despite her fear, Linda fought back. When he returned and tried to strangle her with a leather strap. Sadly, her resistance wasn't enough to save her life. Once she was dead, he carried out his usual twisted rituals. But this time, something made him pause. He found her skin too soft, too unmarked, to carry out his typical gruesome mutilations. Instead, he decided to experiment, using electricity in an attempt to make her body twitch with current. It didn't work. Unsatisfied, he reverted to his familiar disposal method, tying her remains to a car transmission and dumping the body into a river. The next day, Linda failed to show up for work. Her car was discovered abandoned, just like the others, no signs of robbery, struggle, or forced entry. As with previous disappearances, investigators were left with few leads. Suspicion briefly turned toward her boyfriend, but there was nothing to link him to her vanishing. By this time, Oregon police were beginning to piece together a pattern. They constructed a timeline of the missing women, noticing that all had disappeared in the second half of each month. Most were young white women, many of them students, last seen in public places, mainly parking lots. Still, without physical evidence, there was little to act on. That changed on May 10, 1969, when a fisherman spotted something unusual floating in the water. As he got closer, he realized it was something far more disturbing, a weighted bundle that turned out to be a woman's body, still wearing her coat. Authorities arrived quickly, and forensic analysis confirmed the remains belonged to Linda Sale. The autopsy revealed she had been strangled, and there were strange post-mortem injuries to puncture wounds, one on each side of her ribcage, surrounded by burn marks. Someone had attempted to electrocute her after death. Investigators were now certain they were dealing with a sadistic killer, someone who not only murdered, but also derived pleasure from tormenting his victims, even after they were dead too. Days later, as divers continued searching the river, they made another grim discovery. A second body, severely decomposed and tied to a car engine, was recovered. The bindings used matched those found on Linda, pointing to the same killer. This victim had also been strangled, likely with a leather strap. Detectives suspected the second body might be Karen. Her mother had described the clothes she was wearing when she vanished, and the clothing on the corpse matched except for one detail. The victim wore an oversized black bra, stuffed with crumpled brown paper towels. It was clearly part of the killer's bizarre fantasies. Dental records soon confirmed the identity. It was Karen. At that point, investigators officially recognized they were chasing a serial killer. Determined to catch him, police began developing a psychological profile. They believed the killer was likely a man between 20 and 30 years old, someone with experience in electrical work, as suggested by the use of copper wiring on the victims. The intricate double knots pointed to a person, skilled with his hands perhaps, a technician or engineer. Investigators also theorized that he may have grown up in an abusive household, possibly dominated by a mother figure, fueling deep-seated rage toward women. Despite this profile, they had no specific suspect. They turned to Karen's social circle and visited her university, questioning classmates about any unusual encounters before her disappearance. Several students reported receiving disturbing phone calls from a man pressuring them to go on dates. Others mentioned a suspicious red-haired, heavy-set man who had been loitering around campus. The breakthrough came when one student described a recent interaction with a man who claimed to be a war veteran, just looking for someone to talk to. She agreed to meet him on campus and gave a detailed description. Tall, freckled, light-haired, and overweight. The details aligned with those given by victims who had narrowly escaped. During their conversation, the man made unsettling remarks about the recent river murders. When he invited her for a walk, she declined, sensing something was off. Before leaving, he said he'd call again the following week. Detectives saw an opportunity. They asked the student to accept his next call and agree to another meeting. On May 25th, as expected, he called again. The student agreed to meet him, and an hour later, he arrived at the university. He was exactly as described: tall, freckled, and overweight. Detectives, who had been watching nearby, took immediate interest. When questioned, the man introduced himself as Jerry Brudas. He claimed he was an electrician, living in Salem with his wife and 2 children. He was unnervingly calm, showing no fear or anxiety despite the police presence. Lacking solid evidence to hold him, detectives let him go, but not before noting the license plate of his car back at the station. A background check on Brudos revealed 2 crucial details. He had a history of psychiatric treatment for disturbing sexual behavior, and records showed that Linda Sella missing encyclopedia saleswoman had been in his neighborhood shortly before she vanished. For the first time, police had a tangible connection between their suspect and the victims. Determined to confront him directly, detectives visited Bruto's home in Salem. While one officer kept him occupied with conversation, another discreetly inspected the property. In the garage, he discovered copper wires tied in the same distinctive knots found on the bodies. Hanging from the ceiling was a sturdy hook, eerily similar to what the forensic reports had described. With suspicion mounting, police secured a warrant to search Bruto's car. The interior had been meticulously cleaned to clean, as if someone had tried to erase any trace of evidence. Though still not enough to arrest him, detectives recalled a critical witness, Gloria, a 15-year-old girl who had escaped a prior abduction attempt. She had given a detailed statement months earlier. Police arranged a lineup. When Gloria saw Bruto's, she immediately identified him as the man who had tried to kidnap her. That was the break they needed. Bruto's was arrested and held on several charges, including illegal possession of a firearm. Officers had found a gun in his car. Realizing the police were closing in, he instructed his wife to destroy his collection of women's clothing and lingerie trophies that could implicate him in the murders. But Darcy, who had long grown weary of his disturbing behavior, refused to comply. Instead of resisting, she granted investigators full access to the garage, an act that led to the horrifying discovery of what would later be known as the Chamber of Horrors. Then, on May 29, 1969, Jerome Brutos was formally taken into custody. During a second, more intensive search of his home, detectives uncovered even more disturbing evidence: a hidden stash of women's high-heeled shoes, a vast collection of lingerie, brass, girdles, panties, and slips, and, most damning of all, a series of deeply disturbing photographs. Among the images were pictures of Brutos himself, dressed in women's undergarments. But far more chilling were the photographs of his victims, some posed in lifelike positions after death. One image depicted a lifeless woman dressed in various outfits, staged as though she were still alive. However, it was one particular photograph that sealed Brutus's fate. A young woman dressed in black lace lingerie and garters, suspended from the ceiling by a rope. A mirror positioned on the floor captured the gruesome scene from below, and, in the lower corner of the image, the reflection of Jerome Brutos himself could be seen, staring at the corpse with visible satisfaction. Initially, Brutos denied everything, but, under intense questioning, he eventually confessed to the murders and mutilations of 4 women. He admitted to disposing of their remains in rivers, keeping selected body parts as grotesque trophies. What shocked investigators most was his complete lack of remorse. Brutos spoke enthusiastically about his obsession with women's shoes and underwear, and about the twisted thrill he got from posing the bodies. He felt no sorrow for the victims, only pity for himself, lamenting that his life was ruined and that his wife and children would suffer as a result. On June 4, 1969, Brutos was officially indicted. He initially entered a plea of not guilty, and the trial quickly turned into a media spectacle. He tried to plead insanity, blaming his crimes on the trauma of an abusive mother who he claimed had shaped his deviant tendencies. He even broke down in front of psychiatrists, hoping to win their sympathy, but the experts weren't fooled. 7 psychologists evaluated Brutos and unanimously rejected his insanity plea. Instead, they diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder. Though disturbed, they concluded he was fully aware that his actions were wrong. Brutos was described as a narcissistic psychopath, manipulative, calculating, self-absorbed, and with a notably high IQ. Realizing he stood no chance at acquittal, Brutos changed his plea. He confessed to the murders of Jan Whitney, Karen Sprinker, and Linda Sale. He also admitted to killing Linda Slauson, the encyclopedia saleswoman, because her body was never found and no photographic evidence existed. He was never formally charged with her murder. On June 28, 1969, Jerome Brudos was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. His reign of terror had finally ended. Brudos's wife, Darcy, was briefly arrested and investigated as a potential accomplice after a neighbor claimed she had seen her helping him with one of the victims. However, without solid evidence of her involvement, she was never charged. In 1970, she divorced Brudos, changed her name, and vanished with their children, cutting all ties with the man she once called her husband. Brudos was sent to Oregon State Penitentiary, where he maintained a quiet and obedient facade. But even behind bars, his obsessions persisted. He frequently wrote letters to shoe companies, requesting catalogs to fuel his fantasies. Life in prison was anything but easy. He was often targeted by other inmates. At one point, another prisoner slashed his neck, requiring multiple stitches. After that, Brudos withdrew, refusing interviews and avoiding attention, fearing his notoriety would only provoke more violence against him. Over the years, he filed numerous appeals. In one, he argued that the infamous photograph of a victim suspended from the ceiling should be inadmissible, since the woman wasn't one of the 3 he had been officially convicted of murdering. In another, he claimed medical issues, including blackouts and a distorted sense of reality during the killings. His final attempt came in June 1995, when he argued that he no longer posed a danger to society. The Oregon Parole Board swiftly denied the request, declaring that he would remain behind bars for life. No further hearings would be granted. Brudos's final years were marked by failing health. He suffered from liver cancer for several years and eventually died in the prison infirmary on March 28, 2006, at the age of 67. At the time of his death, Jerome Brudos held the grim distinction of being the longest-serving inmate in the Oregon Department of Corrections. After exiting the house to call for backup, officers re-entered ensure if there were more victims or if the killer was still inside. Blood covered nearly every surface. They quickly discovered April and 12-year-old Daniel. Unsure whether they were still alive, officers carried them out to the front yard for emergency treatment. Then they found David, the father. He was clearly deceased, so they moved on, continuing the grim search. Soon, they came to a locked bathroom door. Fearing the killer may have barricaded themselves inside, officers forced it open. But there were no attackers. Instead, they were met with an unthinkable horror: the lifeless bodies of 7-year-old Christopher and 5-year-old Victoria. One detective would later say it was the worst thing he had ever seen in his career. Upstairs, they found 2-year-old Autumn lying asleep in her crib, miraculously alive, having slept through the entire massacre. At that point, the full force of law enforcement was mobilized. In a town like Broken Arrow, where such brutality was nearly unheard of, this was an all-hands-on-deck situation. Every available resource was summoned to the scene at 709 Magnolia Drive. The full detective force, K-29 units, firefighters, paramedics. While investigators continued processing the scene inside, officers noticed the back door was ajar and spotted fresh footprints. The K-9 unit was deployed to track the trail, and it took just 4 minutes to find the suspects. The 2 oldest sons, Robert and Michael, were discovered hiding in a wooded area behind the home, lying low in the dirt. Officers ordered them to come out with their hands up. Robert complied. Michael did not. A police dog was sent in and bit him on the right shoulder before forcing him to surrender. Covered in blood and dirt, the brothers were handcuffed and taken into custody. As Robert was placed in the patrol car, he turned to his younger brother and said chillingly, "It's been a pleasure. I'm proud of what I've done." Photos taken at the time of their arrest captured more than just their appearances. They revealed the horror that had just unfolded, and disturbingly, a twisted satisfaction on Robert's face. As the crime scene was still being processed, the brothers were secured in patrol vehicles. From the back seat, They had a direct line of sight to the aftermath of their actions, including the sight of officers carrying their baby sister, Autumn, out of the house alive, before interrogation began. Robert and Michael were briefly allowed to speak freely to one another. Once questioning commenced, they were separated. Robert's interrogation footage remained sealed from public view, but Michael's was not. Based on what is known, Robert's testimony must have contained deeply disturbing material to justify the permanent sealing. Between their statements, courtroom testimony, and surviving Sister Crystal's accounts, a picture began to emerge, one that the Broken Arrow community could never have imagined. This was not a spontaneous act of violence. Far from it. Detectives learned that the brothers had been planning the murders for over a year. Isolated from the outside world, they relied on one another almost exclusively. They shared everything, especially their darkest thoughts. Their late-night conversations, whispered in the room they shared, were steeped in fascination with death, murder, and infamy. According to Robert, their family lived in near total isolation. The children rarely left the house, sometimes going months without stepping outside. Their parents, David and April, were equally reclusive, often locking themselves inside separate home offices. The house was under constant surveillance. Cameras monitored the hallways and even the children's bedrooms, installed by their father to keep tabs on everything. Though the children were technically homeschooled, Robert told investigators that he and his siblings were largely their mother would occasionally direct them to websites, but there was no structured education. Robert himself taught Michael from grades 3 through 5. He suspected Michael might have had undiagnosed dyslexia, though it was never officially determined. What was clear was Michael's speech impediment, which their father punished him for, yelling at him to stop talking or shaking him when he stuttered. That abuse forged a deep dependency in Michael. He trusted Robert completely, seeing him not just as a brother, but as a guide and protector. Their bond took a dark turn. The brothers became obsessed with serial killers Ted Bundy, Richard Ramirez, and mass shooters like the Columbine attackers, and James Holmes, who shot up a movie theater in Colorado. While April and David worked to insulate their children from the outside world, they unknowingly gave them unrestricted access to the darkest corners of the internet. The boys each had 2 laptops, no filters, no parental controls. Their conversations soon evolved from fascination to intent. Robert harbored resentment toward society, believing that if he killed enough people, he would eventually eliminate someone who wasn't contributing. That, to him, would be doing the world a favor. Killing one person, he believed, wouldn't matter, but killing many, that made him powerful. Robert even took a job at a Christian call center, not to save money for a car, or for college bet to finance their plan. He purchased knives, guns, body armor, helmets, and ammunition. And the warning signs weren't just online. Their sister Crystal, who would later survive the massacre, overheard the brothers talking openly about killing the family. In fact, over a year before the attack, they asked her directly if she would help them murder everyone in the house. Terrified, Crystal told her mother everything. She explained that Robert and Michael had not only talked about it, they had started collecting weapons. April wasn't alarmed, even when she found bulletproof vests and more disturbing items among her son's belongings. Her response: "That's just what boys do," brushing it off as a cry for attention. Their father's only concern was that they were wasting money, but the reality was far darker. The boys' obsession grew. They began comparing famous mass shootings and plotting how theirs would surpass them all. In their minds, outdoing the death tolls of previous killers would guarantee infamy. "Did you guys talk about being on the news or seeing yourselves on TV?" "Yeah," Michael admitted. "What kind of things did you say? That we'd kill more people? We'd be famous? We'd end up on Wikipedia." "You thought it'd be a big deal?" "Yeah. I thought they might even make a TV show about it becoming famous. That was the real goal." "What did you want?" the detective asked. Michael hesitated, smiled faintly. You know what I wanted? Nice one. That's a lot of letters for me. Good job. From that moment on, the event became almost secondary. The killers themselves were presented as a blur by design. The detective tried to understand their thinking, asking why they'd use knives instead of guns. Were the knives the original plan? Yeah, Michael said. The guns weren't going to arrive in time, and they'd be too loud anyway. So the plan was to use knives on the family first. Yeah, it didn't go as planned. Thank God. His face twitched, a flicker of something, but his voice remained disturbingly calm. Nothing had gone the way they pictured it. Real life wasn't like the movies. Detectives then dug deeper, asking about their feelings toward their parents. You guys not get along with your mom and dad? Michael shrugged. Mom was okay. Just ... a little much, sometimes. But Robert's resentment ran far deeper. He had allegedly fantasized about killing their parents since the age of 13, claiming he had been physically abused. September was originally when they intended to carry out the attack, but things came together faster than expected. Over the course of months, they collected knives. Once Robert turned 18 and could legally purchase firearms, the final plan was set in motion. He told Michael he was ready, and Michael said it sounded like a great idea. They ordered the guns online and arranged to pick them up from a local store. Over 2,000 rounds of ammunition were shipped to their home. The plan: kill their family the day before the ammo delivery, so no one would question its arrival. Then collect the weapons and begin their cross-country killing spree. Did you know where you were going? Washington State, Michael said. Why Washington? Good area. And our parents had money in Yukon, he added. The plan was brutal and methodical. Murder the family with knives, dismember the bodies, store them in tubs in the attic, clean up the scene, wait for the ammo, then pick up the guns and steal the family car. Their journey would be marked by random massacres, gas stations, restaurants, killing 5 or more people at a time. They hoped to surpass a body count of 100. Even that plan, though, was riddled with flaws. As detectives continued speaking with Michael, a cut on his hand, sustained during the murders, reopened and bled quietly, a haunting reminder of what had taken place just hours earlier. It was around 7 a.m., the morning after the attack. Michael's calm, detached demeanor, as he described the horror, was disturbing, but reportedly not as chilling as Robert's sealed interview, where he allegedly laughed and became animated. While recounting the killings, they had planned to document it all, creating 2 versions of their family's murder, one including the bodies, the other sanitized for online release. Their legacy immortalized as the interrogation continued. Michael was forthcoming about their plans, but when it came to the actual murders, he minimized his role. He described Robert carrying out the killings while he simply watched. They started fighting, he recalled. Then Robert got him down. I think he killed him. Did he cut your dad's throat? I think so. It happened in my room. And where were you? In the hallway. Eventually, he admitted to stabbing his 7-year-old brother Christopher once in the neck, but detectives didn't believe that was the extent of his involvement. You had all these plans, the detective pressed. The gear, the weapons, the timeline. Then it starts falling apart. Did you just freak out? Yeah, I didn't know it'd be like that, Michael said. You stood there and let Robert kill everyone. That was my plan. I didn't want to kill anyone. I loved them. I couldn't do it. But you did stab someone in the neck, the detective reminded him. I just kind of look, the detective said. Robert shouldn't get all the credit here. This is going to be big. You're going to be on the news. People will want interviews. Infamy was the end game, and Michael knew it. The detectives circle back once more, pressing him for the truth, reminding him that Robert is also being interviewed, and that the full picture will soon come together. Detective, you said you were supposed to help with the killings. that your job was to kill your dad. But Robert had already taken care of that, hadn't he? So then what happened? Were you supposed to kill Christopher? The young man hesitates, his voice dull and distant. Suspect. No, it just worked out that way. Killing Christopher wasn't originally my responsibility. Detective. But you stabbed him, right? In the neck. Suspect. I think so. I might have hit his shoulder, I don't know. I think I broke his neck, too. I don't remember it clearly. By now, it's around 8 o'clock in the morning, about an hour since the attacks. The detective gently prods again. Detective, how do you feel about everything now? The boy lowers his head. His words are flat, but sincere. Suspect. I didn't want it to happen. I didn't want to do it. The investigators continue to give him space to tell the truth, to come clean. But his version remains mostly unchanged. He admits to stabbing Christopher and insists it was only once. Detective, here's the problem. You've been really cooperative, and I appreciate that. But Robert's telling us a different story, and I don't want that to blow back on you. So is there anything you left out? At this point, the suspect tries to explain. He recalls a moment in the woods, sitting with Robert, when Robert asked how many people he had killed. Suspect. I told him 3. Just said it. But I didn't say who. I think I just wanted to seem, I don't know, capable. Detective. Do you think it makes a difference killing 1 person versus 3? You think the sentence will be lighter? The detective pauses, then leans in with a more human tone. Detective, you're smart. Graduated early. Designing games. You've got potential. That's why I'm trying to help you. But if you lie now, people are going to label you a liar, manipulative, evil. I don't think that's who you are, but we need the truth. All of it. The suspect remains quiet. Detective, I talk to people all the time. I know when I'm not getting the whole story. Moments later, both detectives step out of the room. When they return, their tone has shifted. Detective, I just got a summary from the team talking to Robert. He's saying you did more than you've admitted. And honestly, I already gave you 1 shot to be straight with me. Suspect, I'm sorry, I didn't tell the whole truth. Detective, who else did you stab? Suspect, I think I stabbed Christopher 2 or 3 times. Detective, and Victoria, did you stab her? Suspect, I tried. She was walking away. I came at her from behind the car, tried to cut her neck. Detective, is that when you cut yourself? Suspect, maybe. I think so. Detective, did you stab her? Cut her? Suspect, I think so. Yeah. The detectives urge him to stop guessing. Stop saying I think, and just say what he knows. Detective, you cut your mother's throat. You stabbed Christopher multiple times. Who else? Suspect, I didn't press the button. I didn't stab Victoria or Daniel. But seconds later, his story shifts again. Suspect, okay, I tried to stab them all. Detective, so you stabbed them all? Suspect, yeah. The detectives then pivot to motive, asking, why? Why murder his entire family? Suspect, they were in the way. It was about starting with a high body count, something that would get attention. It's kind of famous now, setting a record. Detective, so this is all a game to you, a kill count. The suspect stares down, his voice fading. Suspect, I didn't like it the minute it started. Detective, your mother, you watched her scream and bleed out after you cut her throat. How does that make you feel? Suspect, I don't want to think about it. Detective, and your little brother, Christopher? You stabbed him in the neck. What had he ever done to you? Nothing. So he was just a number to you? Yes. And how do you feel about that now? It was pointless. What was all of it? Detectives had heard enough. There were no more questions, despite Michael's claim that his role in the killings was limited. Forensic evidence and survivor testimony, especially from Crystal, painted a very different picture. The horror that unfolded inside the Beverly family home was not random. It was deliberate, coordinated, and brutally executed. The brothers had carefully planned a massacre to begin at midnight, when everyone else in the house was asleep. The goal was to murder their entire family, including the youngest, a toddler Michael, casually referred to as the baby. In his written confession, Michael was supposed to begin by killing their father with a crossbow. Robert would then slit their mother's throat. At around 11:30 p.m., their mother April and their sister Crystal were still awake. April asked Crystal to remind her brothers to do the dishes. When Crystal entered their room, she noticed they were wearing body armor and had laid out several knives on the bed. While this wasn't entirely unusual, she knew about their knife collection and past behavior. Something felt different. As she turned to leave, Michael asked Robert, "Should we do it now?" Robert replied, "Yes." He then called Crystal back, saying there was something on Michael's computer she needed to see. As Crystal leaned in over Michael's shoulder, Robert came up from behind, covered her mouth, and slashed her throat. They expected her to die quickly, quietly. She did, instead. Crystal screamed and fought back, her blood soaking the room. The noise alerted April, who ran into the room and was immediately attacked by Robert. She screamed for anyone to call 911. This was the moment. Robert would later admit that he realized killing people was far more difficult than he'd imagined. While Robert stabbed their mother, Crystal stumbled through the house, desperately, searching for a phone. She screamed at her younger sister, Victoria, to lock herself in the bathroom. Unable to find a phone, Crystal fled out the front door, collapsing on the lawn. Robert followed and, realizing she was still alive, began strangling her. When she went limp and appeared dead, he dragged her back to the front porch. He told Michael to bring her the rest of the way inside, so they could dismember her body with the others later. Michael did. Then the brothers resumed their plan. Meanwhile, 13-year-old Christopher and 5-year-old Victoria were hiding in a bathroom. Michael went to the door and knocked, pretending to be in danger. "Let me in," he cried. "He's going to kill me." When the siblings unlocked the door to save him, Michael attacked. He stabbed both Christopher and Victoria 21 and 23 times respectively. When asked later why he tricked them if he no longer wanted to go through with the killings, Michael offered only a vague explanation. "I was going to tell her." He never did. 12-year-old Daniel had locked himself inside his father's office nearby. He had Michael's cell phone and used it to call 911. Michael again used the same deception. He begged Daniel to let him in, claiming Robert was after him. Daniel opened the door. Michael took the phone and smashed it, then turned to Robert and said, "He's all yours." Robert began stabbing Daniel, who managed to flee but only made it to the living room where his mother's bloodied body lay. He collapsed and died near her. His call to 911 likely saved Crystal's life, and the life of their 2-year-old sister. Autumn, their father David, had been asleep upstairs. When he came down and saw the chaos, he rushed at Robert, but was overpowered. Robert stabbed him in the chest, then continued the assault until David lay dead. He suffered more than 28 stab wounds. Later, Robert would brag that he was glad he'd worn Kevlar sleeves during the attacks, because his family had tried to bite him as they fought for their lives. Nearly all the victims had defensive wounds, including young Victoria. Most were stabbed repeatedly in the head, neck, chest, back, and abdomen. Shortly after killing Daniel, there was a knock at the front door. They panicked, with Crystal now lying just inside, screaming. They knew it wasn't the police because, if it had been, officers would have forced their way in. Realizing it might be a neighbor, they quickly threw on their vests and helmets, failed to find the car keys, and abandoned the rest of their plan, which included dismembering the bodies, stealing ammunition and weapons, and fleeing in the family's SUV. They also forgot about their final intended victim, the baby. They had planned to decapitate her with an axe. Instead, they bolted out the back door, leaped over the fence, and ran into the wooded area behind their home. Once there, They collapsed exhausted from the sheer physical toll of their rampage. They listened as sirens wailed in the distance. Then came the dogs. Michael refused to surrender and had to be dragged out by a police canine. It seemed to have no emotional effect on him. Meanwhile, emergency responders rescued the 2-year-old Autumn, Crystal, who had suffered life injuries including a gaping slash to her stomach so deep her organs were exposed, was rushed to the hospital. She named her 2 older brothers as the attackers before being taken into surgery. Doctors were shocked she was still alive. Inside the home, police recovered a thumb drive that allegedly contained video footage of the massacre. Its contents have never been publicly released. Both Robert and Michael were charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault and battery with intent to kill. They initially pleaded not guilty. Eventually, Robert changed his plea as part of a deal that spared him the death penalty. Crystal, now recovering and determined, asked the district attorney to ensure that Robert would never be released. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without parole, plus another for attempted murder, along with fines and victim restitution. Michael's trial began in April 2018. His defense argued against him being tried as an adult, but under Oklahoma law, 15 to 17-year-olds charged with first-degree murder must be. The judge ruled that both Michael's confession and the drawings he created in jail gruesome crayon illustrations of the killings could be used as evidence. Crystal testified. So did Robert, now 21. He claimed he alone had carried out the murders and that Michael merely coaxed the siblings into unlocking doors. But his testimony contradicted both the forensic evidence and Crystal's account. When prosecutors confronted him, Robert admitted he had lied repeatedly during his police interviews, telling them what he wanted to happen, not what actually happened. Michael's motive, according to Robert's testimony, was to earn recognition in case the killings ever gained notoriety. Robert also delved deep into their traumatic upbringing, painting a disturbing picture of their household. He described regular physical and emotional abuse at the hands of their father, recalling one incident where their dad punched and kicked Michael, which he claimed was typical behavior. Robert recounted another memory where their father dragged him up the stairs simply for leaving the light on, and their mother once slapped him so hard it left a lasting mark. She cruelly joked that he looked like the Joker, which she found hilarious, but Robert was enraged. He believed both parents despised their children and only continued having them to collect tax benefits. In haunting detail, Robert described each step of the murders, including how the blood felt on his hands and how his mother had prayed for him while he was stabbing her. Crystal later confirmed the abuse allegations. Her victim impact statement, read aloud by her adoptive mother, conveyed her ongoing fear that Michael might one day be released and return to finish what he started. The jury found Michael guilty on all counts. He received 5 life sentences, with the possibility of parole for each first-degree murder, plus 28 years for the assaultage to be served consecutively. As the verdict was read, at least half the jury members were visibly emotional. The bailiff had to pass around tissues. Michael attempted to sit, but collapsed and had to be assisted back into his seat by an officer. Robert is currently serving his sentence at the Joseph Harp Correctional Center, while Michael is housed at the Lexington Correctional Center, both medium-security prisons in Lexington, Oklahoma. Since being incarcerated, Robert has tattooed both his hands. One reads Lupiex 5, symbolizing his 5 life sentences without parole. The other simply says, life. In July 2019, at the age of 24, Robert attacked prison staff using an 8-sharpened weapon, attempting to ambush them from behind. Guards quickly subdued him. For this attack, he pled guilty to assault and battery and received 3 more life sentences, added to his existing 6. Michael's legal team tried to appeal his sentence, arguing that state laws banning life sentences for juveniles had been violated, while each sentence technically allowed for parole. When stacked consecutively, they effectively denied him that opportunity. The case reached the Supreme Court, which upheld the sentence. The justices argued that child murderers should not get a volume discount when they kill multiple people, affirming that consecutive sentences were within the court's discretion. The former Beaver home where the murders had taken place was eventually listed for sale, but drew no buyers. In February 2017, the Tulsa Community Foundation launched a fundraising campaign to convert the house into a memorial garden. Just 1 month later, the home mysteriously burned down. Authorities suspected arson, but no suspect was ever identified. Shortly thereafter, the foundation reached its $50,000 goal and purchased the property. Turning over the deed to the city of Tulsa, the house was demolished, and a park was dedicated on the land the following year. During the massacre, the family dog, Sally, remained quietly crated in an upstairs closet. She went unnoticed for 16 hours until a neighbor discovered her. That neighbor took Sally in, hoping one day the surviving children might come back for her. Crystal and Autumn, the only survivors, were placed in state custody for their protection. All records related to their whereabouts and subsequent lives were sealed. Their fate remains unknown. This case was heartbreaking and senseless, a tragedy that left the entire community in mourning. As Tulsa County DA Steve Kunzweiler reflected, "It is seared into my memory. I will not presume to know how or why people choose to do the things they do, which bring harm to innocent lives. A hidden path to horror behind the main house, under the dim glow of a fading light. A narrow trail lead investigators up a gentle hill. There, tucked deep within a dense thicket of trees, stood a small, weather-worn wooden shed. What the authorities discovered inside was more horrifying than anything they'd expected. Inside the shed, they found an assortment of torture tools, bamboo rods, thick ropes, and crude, medieval-looking metal instruments. As they continued their search, another shocking discovery emerged. A woman, barely alive, lay motionless on the ground. Her body, emaciated and skeletal, showed clear signs of extreme starvation. A quick medical assessment revealed she hadn't eaten for 3 days, leaving her in a state of total physical and psychological collapse. At that very moment, the homeowner Li Wan was on the property, seemingly stunned by the arrival of law enforcement. But it soon became clear, this house wasn't just a prison. It was a personal hell Li Wan had constructed, where vulnerable women were dehumanized and stripped of every basic right. Testimony verified. A house of human misery, Lang Ning's earlier testimony had been met with skepticism, but the investigation confirmed every detail. Li Wan's home was indeed a nightmare realm where mentally ill women were enslaved, forced to serve the twisted appetites of him and his accomplices. Authorities immediately secured the entire site and placed Li Wan under arrest, though he said little. His cold, defiant stares sent a chill through everyone in the room. The interrogation, a monster unmasked inside the interrogation room. Li Wan remained eerily calm, almost as if he had accepted his fate. With chilling composure, he began to tell his story. Born in the village of Tai, Li Wan was once his family's pride, but his temperament, marked by laziness and aggressions, soon led him into a life of crime. In 1971, at age 37, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for assaulting a local woman, rather than reforming him. Prison made him more calculated and dangerous. Following another arrest for burglary in the late 1970s, he spent 5 more years behind bars. By the time he was released, his family had completely disowned him. Alone, disgraced, and wandering, Li Wan lived like a drifter on the fringes of society. In a last-ditch effort to stabilize his life, he began fish farming by a pond near the village, but his reputation, laziness, and lack of direction doomed the endeavor. By his early 50s, Li Wan was penniless, rejected by his family, and completely isolated. The descent into darkness. It was during this period of isolation that something monstrous began to grow within him. His targets, mentally ill, Homeless women, the most abandoned and voiceless members of society. I just renovated my house and had no idea how to earn a living, he confessed. One afternoon, I saw a young woman wandering near the pond. She looked to be in her early 20s, petite, messy hair. He lured her into his home with an offer of food and shelter. Once inside, he locked the gates and forced her into submission. She panicked, screamed, tried to escape, he recalled with a smirk. But I was prepared. I tied her hands and feet and threw her in the corner. For days, she refused to eat, cried, screamed. Luann was unmoved. I gave her water when she was too weak to resist. After about a week, she stopped fighting. When asked if he felt any guilt, his response was devoid of empathy. Why would I feel guilty? She was nothing. No one cared about her. 6 months later, he sold her to a farmer as a wife. It was just the beginning. A hellish system emerges by the end of 1996. Luann had transformed his remote house into a nightmarish brothel catering to the depraved. He learned that mentally ill women were the perfect victims, forgotten by society, defenseless, and rarely reported missing. When he captured a new woman, Luann assessed her behavior. If she was docile, she remained in the house to serve clients. If she resisted or proved too troublesome, he sold her either to isolated farmers or underground human trafficking rings. Inside his home, the victims were numbered like inventory. He charged a mere 3 to 5 yuan per encounter, drawing in a steady stream of older, single, or widowed men. These clients knew full well what they were doing was illegal. Fear of exposure kept them silent, making them complicit in Luann's atrocities. Expansion of evil. Seeking to expand, Luann constructed another hidden wooden house on a hillside behind the pond, a secluded location where clients from distant villages could visit without suspicion. The women held there lived in unimaginable conditions, shackled by the ankles 24/7. They were given only enough food and water to survive. Any disobedience was met with brutal beatings using bamboo canes and torture instruments. To manage his growing enterprise, Luann recruited Lang Ashing, a regular client turned apprentice. Lang not only helped oversee the women, but also joined in kidnapping new victims. A system built on silence for 7 years, Luann's depravity went undetected. His house, positioned on the edge of the village and surrounded by barbed wire and canals, was nearly inaccessible. Locals avoided the area. Even the clients, gripped by guilt and fear, never spoke a word. But every hidden evil eventually finds the light. The collapse begins in July 2003. Everything began to unravel. Lang Ashing and a young woman named Bing were arrested after a violent altercation. Bing, one of the few who managed to escape, had attacked Lang in public, exposing him and unraveling the entire criminal network. Lang had once been just another customer, frequenting Luann's operation. Over time, he became fascinated with Luann's methods of exploiting mentally ill women for profit. Flattering Luann as a genius, he convinced him to become a mentor, even offering a fee for the training. Luann taught him everything from how to identify mentally ill women at train stations and bus stops, to how to restrain them without leaving visible injuries. Eventually, Lang stumbled upon a corrupt private mental institution. The facility, disguised as a care center, was actually a front for human trafficking. Patients with no family support and overdue bills were sold off in secret. Lang struck a deal with the administrator and began acquiring women from the institution. Records were falsified to cover the disappearances, and the victims were quickly turned into Luann's captives, beaten, shackled, and sold. Bing, the unbroken was one such victim. A young woman with severe mental illness. She had been sold 4 times and returned due to her violent outbursts. Desperate to offload her, the institution sold her to Lang at a discounted price, but Bing fought back. On the return journey, she suddenly attacked Lang Ashing in the middle of a crowded street. The public nature of the assault drew immediate attention. Police intervened, arrested Lang, and began asking questions. That single moment of resistance from a woman who had survived so much brought down an empire of abuse that had thrived in the shadows for nearly a decade. Case 6. The Pondside House. Horror. Through their investigations, police uncovered the horrifying truth. Numerous women had been imprisoned inside the so-called Pondside House. Some were sold off as wives to isolated farmers in remote areas, while others were traded between multiple captors like commodities. Shockingly, a number of these women even gave birth while being held in these horrific conditions. On April 21, 2004, the trial of Luan and his 17 accomplices began at the Intermediate People's Court in Kunming City. The case drew national attention due to its harrowing nature and staggering scale. Luan faced charges of abduction, rape, human trafficking, and illegal confinement. He admitted to kidnapping at least 17 women between 1999 and 2003, though investigators believed the real number exceeded 50. Several other accomplices, including Langashing and a number of local men, received relatively lenient prison sentences of just 3 to 4 years. The public was outraged by this, believing the punishment did not match the severity of the crimes. Their anger only intensified when Luan was released on parole years later due to reported health issues. The public demanded to know how Luan was able to operate for over 7 years without detection. Testimonies later revealed that many local officials had either turned a blind eye to his activities or had accepted bribes to protect him. Case 7. The Frankfurt Slasher. On August 26, 1985, workers at the SEPTA train yard in the Frankfurt neighborhood of Philadelphia began their morning shift like any other until they made a shocking discovery. Between rows of stacked railroad ties, they found the mutilated body of a woman. Investigators quickly arrived to find a scene straight out of a nightmare. The woman, partially clothed, had been stabbed 47 times in the chest and head. Her blouse was pulled open to expose her chest. Her legs had been deliberately positioned to humiliate her, and a deep slash across her abdomen revealed internal organs. This wasn't just murder, it was an act of extreme brutality. The victim was soon identified as Helen Patton. Though Helen and her ex-husband Kermit still shared a suburban home, they led largely independent lives. Kermit told police it wasn't unusual for Helen to disappear for days without notice, and that he last saw her on August 19th. Despite the savage nature of the killing, police struggled to find any leads, evidence, or motive. They speculated that Helen, known to frequent bars in the area, may have encountered her killer there. What they didn't yet realize was that Helen would be remembered as the first known victim of a serial killer who would terrorize the neighborhood over the next 5 years. Over time, 9 women, all white, all regulars at bars along a 3-block stretch of Frankfurt Avenue between Wakeling and Bridge Streets, would fall victim to the killer. Each was attacked with disturbing violence, stripped, and left in sexually suggestive poses. The media dubbed him the Frankfurt Slasher. In January 1986, just 4 months after Helen's murder, 68-year-old Anna Carroll was found dead in her apartment. Her front door had been left wide open, and though she had only been stabbed 6 times, her body bore similar mutilation to Helen's, including a large incision from breast to groin, exposing her internal organs. She had also been posed in a degrading manner. Despite the similarities, police didn't immediately link the murders, though both women were known to frequent the same bars. Then came Christmas Day, 1986. Neighbors discovered 64-year-old Susan Olsva murdered in her Richmond Street apartment, not far from Frankfurt Avenue. She had been stabbed 6 times in the back. Like the previous victims, she was a regular at a local bar known as the Golden Bar. Still, police failed to connect the dots. That changed on January 8, 1987, when the body of 28-year-old Jean Durkin was found under a fruit stand on Pratt Street, alarmingly close to where Helen had been discovered. Jean who had been homeless for several years, often slept near the Golden Bar. Her body had been stabbed 74 times in the chest, back, and buttocks. Blood covered a nearby truck and fence, and she had been sexually assaulted and posed, just like the earlier victims. This time, police could no longer deny the connection. Under increasing pressure, they formed a task force to investigate the string of murders, now widely accepted as the work of a serial killer. The bartender at the Golden Bar confirmed that all 4 women had been in the bar in the days or nights leading up to their deaths, but couldn't provide specific dates or suspect descriptions. He did suspect that someone from the bar might be involved. Police interviewed bar regulars, but found no promising leads. They learned that Jean Durkin was a formidable woman, so much so that 6 officers had once failed to subdue her during an arrest. This suggested that her killer may have used charm rather than force to lure her in, perhaps someone she trusted or knew. Helen's case shared that element. Her family insisted she wouldn't have gone willingly to the train tracks with a stranger. Investigators briefly looked into another woman, Michelle Dearer, who had argued with Jean over a blanket the night before the murder, but no connection to the crime was found. By the end of January, the community gathered at the train station for a candlelight vigil in memory of the 4 women. Still, police weren't fully convinced they were dealing with a serial killer until the violence resumed. A few weeks later, the frozen and partially clothed body of 29-year-old Catherine M. Jones was found. Unlike the others, she hadn't been stabbed. She had been bludgeoned to death. Her skull was crushed and her jaw broken. At first, her case was treated as unrelated, but in time, she too would be suspected as another victim of the Frankfurt slasher. Then, the killings abruptly stopped. For nearly 2 years, there were no further murders fitting the pattern. Other unrelated homicides rocked the area in the meantime. One of the most shocking being the arrest of Gary Heidnik in April 1987, after a woman escaped from his basement and claimed he had kept her and several others chained up as captives. Police initially hoped Heidnik might be the Frankfurt slasher, but that hope would prove premature. After a raid on his home, police uncovered 3 emaciated, barely alive women who had been held captive and used as sex slaves. The man confessed not only to their abuse, but also to cannibalizing parts of his victims and feeding human remains to his other captives. Just a few weeks later, in August, Harrison Graham, living barely a mile from the first man, was evicted from his apartment due to complaints about a foul odor. Upon investigation, authorities discovered the decomposing bodies of 6 women, along with the skeletal remains of a 7th dot. At first, Graham claimed the bodies were already there when he moved in, but eventually, he confessed to strangling the women during sex. As disturbing as it was, there was no evidence that Graham and the other man were connected. Despite the eerie similarities between their crimes, both appeared to have been operating independently at the same time and in the same areas, the Frankfurt slasher. However, both men were already in custody by the time the slasher struck again. On November 11, 1988, residents of an apartment building on Penn Street, just blocks from where Jean's body had been found, discovered another gruesome crime scene. In the foyer of the building lay the body of 66-year-old Margaret Vaughn. She had been evicted from that very building earlier the same day for failing to pay rent. Margaret had been stabbed 29 times, and her brutal injuries mirrored the grotesque pattern seen in earlier murders, convincing detectives that the slasher had returned. But this time, there was a witness. A bartender reported seeing Margaret the night before, drinking at her bar, with a round-faced white man wearing glasses and walking with a limp. A police sketch was quickly drawn up and widely circulated. Despite numerous tips, none led to a viable suspect. Most calls came from elderly women suspicious of their bus drivers, or from feuding neighbors pointing fingers. Psychics weighed in with vague leads, and one even suggested witchcraft might be involved. Interestingly, there was indeed a cult known to practice in a nearby park, but that angle was ultimately dismissed. Police also looked into a local white minister who worked in the area and had raised suspicions. But before they could question him, he vanished and was never seen again. Yet again, the investigation stalled. Then, on January 19, 1989, just blocks away on Errett Street, another victim was found. 30-year-old Teresa Sortino had been stabbed 25 times in her apartment, a former psychiatric patient receiving outpatient care. Teresa was discovered naked except for white socks, lying in a pool of blood in her kitchen. She had been violated with a wooden object before being stabbed, slashed across her chest, arms, and face. The piece of wood was found bloodied and propped against the sink. A bloody shoe print was also left behind. The amount of blood throughout the apartment indicated a violent struggle had taken place. Teresa was known to frequent bars along Frankfurt Avenue and was often seen with male companions. One neighbor saw her at the Jolly Post Tavern the night before with a middle-aged white man. Another reported hearing a struggle coming from her apartment that same night. Despite the significant time gap since the last known slasher killing, the similarities were undeniable. Yet, medical examiner Dr. Hoyer initially rejected the theory that a serial killer was involved, citing the unusually long cooling-off period. In his words, serial killers strike again within weeks, not years. But detectives couldn't ignore the pattern. The victims were white, frequented the same local bars, had mental health or addiction struggles, and were all subjected to excessive violence. Police interviewed numerous bar patrons and staff, hoping to find a connection. They even searched sewers and dumpsters for discarded weapons, but came up empty. They did question a man wearing shoes similar to the bloody print found at the scene, a man rumored to be Teresa's boyfriend, but ultimately, they couldn't tie him to the murder. At this point, more than 50 men had been investigated. 2 were under surveillance, and police had a lead on a third. But without a consistent modus operandi, the investigation was frustratingly difficult. How could someone carry out such vicious, bloody murders and leave no trace, no witness, no blood trail? Despite increased patrols and plainclothes officers staking out local bars, nothing came of it then. Over a year later, on April 29, 1990, the killer returned. A patrol officer discovered the body of 46-year-old Carol Dowd in an alley behind Newman's Seafood on Frankfurt Avenue. She had been stabbed 36 times, her face, neck, chest, and back mutilated, and her face showed signs of blunt force trauma. Defensive wounds on her hands suggested she had fought hard. Her abdomen had been slashed open, exposing her intestines, and her left nipple had been removed. Her body was positioned provocatively, and her clothes and purse were found nearby and with nothing stolen. The patrol officer had been in the area earlier that night, investigating a burglary, so police estimated Carol had been killed between midnight and 2 a.m. Several witnesses saw her with an older white man just hours before, matching the description from previous cases. Carol had a long history of mental illness, having been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. She'd recently been doing better, living in a community facility and appearing more stable. But like many of the other victims, she was vulnerable. The police strongly believed the slasher was responsible for Carol's murder and possibly for that of Catherine, another previous victim. The theory developed that the killer was stalking vulnerable women, leaving local bars, then abducting and killing them. This led investigators to question employees at Newman's Seafood, where they encountered someone who would soon become a prime suspect, Leonard Christopher, an African-American man who worked at the seafood market and lived nearby, had previously spoken to police about the murders. He referred to the alley as a prostitute's paradise and a hotspot for drugs. He also admitted knowing both Carol and another victim, Margaret Vaughn. That, combined with his familiarity with the area, raised red flags. Things worsened when Leonard gave inconsistent details about his whereabouts on the night Carol was killed. He initially claimed to have been with his girlfriend, but she told police she'd been home alone. Despite the fact that every witness described an older white man seen with the victims before their deaths, police brought Leonard in for further questioning. Then, someone came forward claiming to have seen Leonard with Carol at a bar the night she died. 2 sex workers also claimed to have seen him at Newman's around that time, with one saying he had a knife. Had they finally caught the Frankfurt slasher? Police searched Leonard's apartment and found a small blood stain on a pair of trousers, but the stain was too tiny to be tested conclusively with the technology of the time. Leonard's co-workers defended him, saying he was gentle and kind. They also claimed the blood stain came from a previous break-in. Leonard had been ordered by his boss to clean up the alley where Carol Dow was murdered. Despite this, police formally arrested him on May 5th and charged him with robbery, abuse of a corpse, murder, and possession of an instrument of crime. He was denied bail on June 20th. It was announced that Leonard would stand trial for the murder of Carol Dow. The evidence against him, however, was entirely circumstantial and largely hinged on the testimonies of 2 sex workers who claimed to have seen him near the crime scene on the night of the attack. One of them, Emily, stated that she saw Leonard enter the alley, where Carol was later found dead. At around 1 a.m., she heard a woman scream shortly after, but left in a car with a man and did not witness anything further. The second witness, Linda Washington, claimed she saw Leonard exiting the alley soon after, carrying his shirt draped over his arm, with a knife and sheath hanging by his waist. Leonard's defense attorney challenged the reliability of both witnesses, highlighting contradictions in their timelines and pointing out that both had criminal records. He also questioned the robbery charge, noting that Carol's purse still contained money and appeared to have been dropped during the attack rather than stolen. Despite the shaky evidence, Leonard's arrest brought temporary relief to the community, but any hope that the danger had passed was shattered on September 6th while Leonard was still in jail when another victim was found, Michelle Durer, 30, the same woman who had previously been considered a suspect in the killing of G. Durkin, following a dispute over a blanket, was discovered dead in her apartment near Frankfurt Avenue. She had been stabbed 23 times in the chest and stomach. The location of her murder was alarmingly close to the sites where Carol and Teresa had been killed. It became increasingly clear that Michelle, too, had likely been targeted by the same serial killer. Yet the man authorities had accused of being the Frankfurt slasher was already behind bars. Michelle, like many of the other victims, struggled with mental health issues and was described as a paranoid loner with erratic behavior. She frequently visited bars along Frankfurt Avenue and, once again, was last seen leaving one with an older white man. Her murder raised serious doubts about Leonard's guilt. He did not match any of the consistent witness descriptions of the white man who had been seen with several victims shortly before they were killed. The circumstantial evidence against Leonard only connected him to one murder. Moreover, Leonard was widely regarded as mild-mannered, well-liked, and had no criminal history or record of violence. Many in the community came to his defense, arguing that he had been wrongfully arrested by a police department desperate to close the case even if it meant letting the real killer continue to roam free. Still, police insisted they had their man. They dismissed Michelle's murder as the work of a copycat killer, an explanation that baffled many, given the striking similarities. On November 29, 1990, Leonard went to trial for the murder of Carol Dow. Crucially, the jury was never told that another woman had been killed while Leonard was in custody, and the court barred any discussion of that murder during the trial despite the police having publicly labeled Leonard as the Frankfurt slasher. Assistant District Attorney Judith Rubino portrayed Leonard as a ruthless killer who used a Rambo knife to murder Carol in the alley behind the fish market where he worked. She acknowledged the lack of direct eyewitnesses, but maintained that the circumstantial evidence was strong enough to prove his guilt. Witnesses had placed him in the alley at the time of the attack. They had heard a woman scream, and he was later seen carrying a knife. Blood-stained clothing was also found in his home. Rubino pointed to Leonard's shifting story about his whereabouts that night, and the suspicious statements he made afterward. His defense attorney, Jack McMahon, argued that the real killer was still at large, and the pressure on the police had led to Leonard's wrongful arrest. He reminded the jury that there had been 6 earlier murders in the area, of which Leonard was being charged with. He also questioned the credibility of the prosecution's witnesses, many of whom were sex workers and drug users, with lengthy criminal records and multiple aliases. Emily, one of the key witnesses, had even admitted to lying to the police on 2 occasions. McMahon highlighted the lack of physical evidence. Leonard had no visible injuries, no murder weapon was ever recovered, and no Rambo knife was found. There was no forensic evidence placing him at the scene. McMahon urged the jury to ask themselves if Leonard truly fit the profile of a cold-blooded killer. Rubino, however, countered with details that complicated the case. She revealed that the morning after Carol's murder, Leonard told his boss, Joseph Fong, that a white woman around 45 had been killed in the alley. Even though police had not released that information publicly at the time, Rubino also cited a strange comment Leonard had made to Fong just days later. He reportedly said, "Maybe I killed her," though he quickly backtracked. Fong testified that Leonard had even mimicked the act of gutting someone while describing the crime. Leonard also claimed to have seen a white man matching the suspect description near the scene at 1 a.m., but no one else came forward to corroborate that. Fong noted that Leonard appeared anxious and agitated in the days following the murder. He claimed he couldn't sleep and was terrified that the killer might break into his apartment and hide in his closet to silence him. The prosecution also presented a blood-stained tissue found near Leonard's apartment, identified as type O, same as Carol's. Leonard had told police he saw a well-dressed white man wiping his hands on a tissue outside his girlfriend's building. The problem was, his girlfriend said Leonard hadn't been there that night. Forensic evidence was limited. A small blood stain was found in Leonard's apartment, but it was too minuscule to be tested with the DNA technology available at the time. The trial concluded on December 11th with closing arguments. The defense emphasized Leonard's good character, the absence of a clear motive, the lack of a murder weapon, and the flimsy circumstantial evidence, yet the prosecution urged the jury to consider Leonard's suspicious behavior and his unexplained knowledge of the crime before details were released. There was no concrete evidence tying Leonard to Carol Dow's murder nor to any of the other murders that had been linked to the so-called Frankfurt slasher. His defense attorney, McMahon, emphasized that the description of the suspected white male matched multiple witness reports tied to the other victims, all of whom had reportedly been seen with a man who looked nothing like Leonard. He called the prosecution's case garbage, arguing that the violent acts Leonard stood accused of were completely out of character for him. But prosecutor Rubino asked the jury to question why multiple witnesses, including some who had initially lied to protect Leonard, would now choose to testify against him. Rubino also highlighted that Leonard had reportedly been seen with Carol at a bar the night she was killed, and that Leonard's girlfriend testified she did not see him that night, directly contradicting his alibi. On December 12th, the jury returned with a verdict. Leonard Christopher was found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Carol Dow. Several jurors appeared visibly shaken by the decision. Leonard himself showed no visible reaction, but his defense attorney shook his head in disbelief. While the prosecution had sought the death penalty, Leonard was instead sentenced to life in prison. He maintained until his death that he had been framed, set up by what he called Piper's prostitutes, who had allegedly been manipulated by the police. Aside from one strange comment made to his boss, Leonard never confessed to the crime, neither before nor after his conviction. To this day, many investigators now believe that Leonard Christopher was not the Frankfurt slasher. In fact, Philadelphia police themselves later conceded that while they believe Leonard may have killed Carol Dow, they do not believe he committed the other 8 murders. Despite the conviction, No direct evidence has ever linked Leonard to Carol's murder. No DNA. No murder weapon. No motive. Nothing concrete. The Innocence Project took up his case, but before any progress could be made, Leonard died of cancer while still incarcerated. So was Leonard truly the Frankfurt slasher? Or was he just a convenient suspect, wrongly accused? What's disturbing is that even after Leonard had been arrested, another victim was killed. Yet, rather than reassess his guilt, authorities dismissed the killing as a copycat without providing any meaningful explanation. Many believe racial bias played a critical role in his conviction. The media's sensationalized reporting intensified public pressure to solve the case quickly, and Leonard, a black man living in a predominantly white neighborhood, became the scapegoat. Too many, it appeared more a verdict aimed at calming the public than one rooted in justice. Officially, the Frankfurt slasher case remains unsolved even with Leonard's conviction for Carol Dow's murder. He is still listed as a suspect in the other killings. But nearly 30 years have passed without a shred of new evidence tying him to any of them. Leonard's offhand statement to his boss remains the most compelling piece of evidence against him, but even that does not account for the fact that he does not match witness descriptions of the man seen with nearly every victim. And again, there is no physical evidence, no forensic link whatsoever tying him to the slasher crimes. Could a copycat have killed that final victim while Leonard was in custody? Possibly. Could the 9 murders have been committed by more than one individual? Also possible. But if they were all committed by the same person, that person could not have been Leonard. Modern DNA testing might be the key to finally solving this mystery. For example, blood found in Leonard's home, never conclusively identified, could now be tested using today's advanced techniques to determine once and for all if it belonged to Carol. There's also that other suspect, the middle-aged white man who called himself a minister and vanished after questioning. Police had actually collected a DNA sample from him before he disappeared, and recent reports suggest that this evidence is now being re-examined using cutting-edge technology. But since the case is still considered an active investigation, authorities have kept their findings under wraps. Attorney Marissa Blinn of the Innocence Project continues to advocate for Leonard Davin after his death. This is a man who spent the majority of his life in a prison cell for a crime he did not commit, she said. Not only was Ms. Dow never given justice, because her real killer was never found, but 8 other women were failed too. Their murders remain unsolved. In October 2023, a new twist emerged. A 51-year-old man named Raymond Wexel Jr., already in jail for allegedly killing a neighbor and stabbing 2 fellow inmates at Blair County Prison, claimed that he was the Frankfurt slasher. Whether his confession is genuine or a desperate grab for attention remains to be seen. But Philadelphia police are actively investigating his claims. It's worth noting, however, that Wexel would have been significantly younger than the man seen with most of the slasher's victims, casting some doubt on the plausibility of his confession. The Frankfurt slasher case sits at the intersection of investigative failure and societal neglect. The women targeted were mostly marginalized, struggling with drug use, poverty, and, in some cases, sex work. Their vulnerability made them easy prey. Whether the truth will ever be uncovered is unclear. But one thing remains certain: this case, riddled with doubts and unanswered questions, continues to haunt the city of Philadelphia. Kip Kinkle's parents thought he was turning a corner. They'd even gifted him a semi-automatic rifle and a hunting knife, believing it might help steer him toward discipline and maturity. But in truth, Kip was spiraling and fooling everyone around him. Around this time, a wave of school shootings swept across the United States, and something about it seemed to ignite a dangerous idea in Kip's mind. He began planning his own attack. On May 20th, 1998, Kip was caught at school with a stolen, loaded handgun. A friend had taken it from another friend's father and sold it to Kip the night before. Both boys were arrested, but released later that day. Kip's father picked him up from the station, furious and disappointed. He warned Kip that if things didn't change, military school was next. That conversation would be their last. Once they got home, Kip, overcome with rage, retrieved a rifle from his room and shot his father in the back of the head. He dragged the body into the bathroom. Later that evening, when his mother returned home, Kip greeted her with a chilling "I love you" before shooting her too. The next morning, Kip put on a trench coat, concealed multiple weapons underneath, and headed to Thurston High School. In the cafeteria, he opened fire. 2 students were killed. 25 others were injured. He was eventually subdued by classmates and taken into custody, but the violence didn't stop there. While at the station, Kip pulled a hidden knife, threatened officers, and even attempted to slash his own wrists. He was disarmed with pepper spray on September 24, 1999. Kip, just 15 years old at the time of the shooting, was charged with 58 felony counts, including 4 for aggravated murder and 26 for attempted murder. Defense psychologists testified that Kip suffered from severe, undiagnosed paranoid schizophrenia. They argued that had his mental health been addressed earlier, the tragedy might have been prevented. Regardless, Kip pled guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to 111 years in prison without the possibility of parole, while the prosecution successfully removed a dangerous individual from society. No one walked away a winner. October 24, 2014, Marysville Pilchuck High School in Washington. Would never be the same. 15-year-old Jalen Frybrook once, the life of the party, committed an unthinkable act that left 4 of his closest friends dead before taking his own life. Just a week earlier, Jalen had been crowned homecoming prince. He was tall, smiling, and beloved, a rising football star, a proud Native American from the Tulip tribe, and a young man many believed would one day become a tribal leader. No one saw it coming, but behind the charm, something was unraveling. In the weeks before the shooting, Jalen got into a fight after someone directed a racist comment at him. He was suspended, adding pressure to what may have already been a fragile mental state, and then came the heartbreak. His Twitter feed revealed a stream of emotional pain. One tweet read, "It breaks me. It actually does. I know it seems like I'm sweating it off, but I'm not, and I never will be able to." The day before the shooting, Jalen posted a chilling final tweet. "It won't last. It'll never last." Still, on the morning of the attack, Jalen seemed normal. He chatted with friends during football practice. He laughed, smiled, shook hands. But by lunch, the cafeteria became a scene of horror. There were around 150 students present when the first shot rang out. Jalen stood there, armed, firing directly at a group of his friends. 4 were killed. Several more were injured. He then turned the gun on himself. In the aftermath, investigators turned their attention to Jalen's father, Raymond Freiberg Jr. It was discovered that the gun Jalen used had been illegally purchased by Raymond, who had concealed a prior domestic violence charge, something that should have barred him from owning firearms. In March 2015, Raymond was convicted of illegal possession of firearms and sentenced to 2 years in prison. But the bigger question loomed. How could someone so beloved, so full of potential, carry out such devastation? November 30, 2021, Oxford High School, Michigan. At 12:50 p.m., 15-year-old sophomore Ethan Crumbley walked out of the bathroom with a 9mm Sig Sauer hidden in his backpack. Without warning, he opened fire in the hallway between classes. 4 students were killed. 8 others, 7 students and 1 teacher, were wounded. This tragedy, like so many before, had clear warning signs. That very morning, a teacher found a disturbing drawing on Ethan's desk. A gun, blood, and the words, "Help me." The thoughts won't stop. The school called his parents, Jennifer and James Crumbley, for an emergency meeting. They were told about the drawing and reminded of an earlier incident when Ethan was caught searching for ammunition online. But instead of taking him home, they left him at school. They knew about the gun. They had just bought it for him a few days earlier. Jennifer had even texted him after the ammo search incident. LOL. I'm not mad at you. You have to learn not to get caught. Unbeknownst to them, or perhaps knowingly ignored, Ethan had already hidden the firearm in his backpack. Later in court, it was revealed that Ethan had carefully planned the attack. In a video he recorded the night before, he said, "My name is Ethan Crumbley, age 15, and I'm going to be the next school shooter." He added chilling words in a written manifesto. "There is no God. I'm the demon. I'm going to open fire on everyone in the hallway." The court also heard about Ethan's deeply troubled home life, his parents' criminal history, neglect, and frequent absences. Neighbors often saw young Ethan left alone while his parents went out drinking. After the family dog died and his only friend moved away, Ethan's mental health deteriorated further. He became obsessed with violence, drawing disturbing images, torturing animals, and talking about demons. Yet no one intervened. In an unprecedented move, both of Ethan's parents were charged with involuntary manslaughter, marking the first time in U.S. history parents were held criminally accountable for a school shooting. They were each sentenced to 15 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 10 in December 2023. Ethan himself was sentenced to life without parole. In court, he offered an apology to the victims' families. "Any sentence that they ask for, I ask that you do impose it on me, because I want them to be happy and feel secure." But no words could undo the damage. September 28, 2016, Townville, South Carolina, at just 14 years old. Jesse Osborne stood before a mirror early that morning, combing his blonde hair and recording a video. In it, he cracked a dark, disturbing joke. Hours later, his words would become reality. That morning, Jesse fatally shot his father, 47-year-old Jeffrey Osborne, inside their home. Reports later revealed that Jesse had suffered years of abuse at the hands of his father. After the murder, Jesse stole a black pickup truck and drove 3 miles to Townville Elementary School, where he had once been a student.